For Canada.
Leader.
Well, I would gently remind the honourable gentleman, and he knows what's coming because he's grimacing already, that under his government we saw inflation go to 11%, we saw the economy crashing, taxes raised to their highest in 70 years, debt out of control under his government. We have had to come along and put the economy back on a stable footing, and that has meant taking difficult decisions, but we need to invest in our public services and we need to put the economy back on a stable footing, and I'm afraid we won't be taking lectures from the party opposite about that.
Lee Pitcher.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I pass on my condolences as well to the Shadow Leader, whose father sounds like a modern-day Father Christmas. As a child, my mother, sister and I experienced a period of homelessness. It was an incredibly difficult time for all of us, but thanks to the kindness of family and friends, we had a support network to get us through it. Sadly, this is not the case for everybody. So this Friday, I'll be joining residents from across my constituency at Doncaster Rovers Football Club for the Snooze in the South Stand event, an initiative that will give participants a powerful insight into the daily reality faced by too many people fighting homelessness in our communities. Will the Leader of the House join me in praising those organising and taking part in this important event and recognise the steps that the government are taking to reducing and eventually getting rid of homelessness altogether?
Leader.
Well, absolutely. Can I thank him for using his own experiences to highlight the important issues that homelessness raises, and join him in wishing himself and all of those others taking part in the Snooze in the South Stand event forthcoming, as he says. He's right. We've got to tackle the root causes of homelessness. We put more money into tackling homelessness. We are ending no-fault evictions, and we are absolutely committed to one of the biggest house building programmes, including in social and affordable housing, that this country's ever seen.
Afra Brandreth.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I add my condolences to the Shadow Leader of the House. As of today, whilst ultra-fast broadband is available in Chester, only 19% of premises currently have access. Villages in my constituency of Chester South and Eddisbury, which are within just a few miles of Chester city centre, villages including Waverton, Littleton, Christleton and Rowton, have an average download speed of just 10 megabytes per second, against the UK average of 69.4 megabytes per second. These villages did not qualify for Project Gigabit as they were classed as urban rather than rural, despite them being in the countryside. They are also outside of the boundaries of the City of Chester, so are not included in urban-focused projects. Would the Leader of the House consider giving opportunity for this issue to be properly addressed in the House in the form of a debate on broadband speeds in rural areas?
Leader.
Well, she's absolutely right that access to fast broadband, full fibre, gigabit broadband, the rollout has been too slow, especially in rural areas like those in her constituency that look like they're between urban and rural indeed. This government is committed to that rollout by 2030, but I'll absolutely ensure she gets an update on what's happening in her constituency.
Paul Wall.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I pass on my own personal condolences to the Shadow Leader. He and I have known each other ever since he entered this House, and he made a fitting and moving tribute to his late father just now. Madam Deputy Speaker, every family in Rochdale, including mine, has a relative or a friend who's benefited from the superb end-of-life care provided by Spring Hill Hospice. So can I pass on the hospice's thanks to the government for providing £111,000 in new funding just this month as part of a £100 million investment in hospices across the country? And will she join me in congratulating Greater Manchester Hospice Provider Collaborative, which visited Parliament this week just to show the NHS just how much innovation and expertise they can provide for the palliative care movement?
Well, absolutely. I was sorry I couldn't join him and other Greater Manchester colleagues when they did the event with the Greater Manchester Hospice Provider Collaboration earlier this week. I saw the photos and fully support his work, and I take this opportunity to thank Spring Hill Hospice in Rochdale, and I'm really pleased to hear that they've got £111,000 of extra investment thanks to this government, and I hope they will continue to flourish.
Clive Jones.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I also express my sympathy to the Shadow Leader of the House? I knew Torquil, his father, very well for many years, working in the toy industry as a competitor and working with him on many charities. He created some fantastic toys, not just Polly Pocket, but the big yellow teapot, the a la carte kitchen, and the big red fun bus. All of those he created when he started a very, very successful public company called Bluebird Toys. He brought fun to millions of children across the world, and in doing so, he had the most wonderful of lives. And the Right Honourable Member and his family will have much to celebrate in the coming weeks and months, remembering Torquil Norman. I and many others associated with the toy industry will be very sad to hear this news today. Madam Deputy Speaker, for months, one of my constituents in Wokingham tries every morning at 6 a.m. to book a driving test, but are left waiting online queues for half an hour with the DVS system, suspecting they are a bot. Actual bots somehow get through buying up test slots and selling them off at a premium. My constituent does everything right, but the system doesn't work for them. Can we have a debate in government time on how to address the frustrating shortages of driving tests?
Leader.
Well, can I first of all thank him? I'm sure if the shadow leader were able to respond to his question, he would want to respond to thank him dearly for for painting another picture, a lovely picture of the shadow leader's father, Torquil Norman. I didn't realise it was Bluebird Toys and all of those other toys that involves. So I think all of us owe him a great debt for inventing such fantastic toys for the rest of us. And he raises a really important issue about the DVSA, for which we get many complaints. It is taking people too long to get driving tests. People are waiting too long to get their slots. I know that there are other colleagues who have raised that with me in the past and will, I think, are going to raise it with me today as well. So perhaps they might club together and get a backbench business debate on this important matter.
Catherine Fuchs.
Yeah, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was extremely relieved to see my constituent, Rebecca Burke, safely return to her family in Monmouthshire after her ordeal in America on Tuesday. I'm sure all of us across this House would like to wish her well after her detention at the border for 21 days due to a mix-up with her visa. Whilst I'm delighted she's home, I was really disappointed and actually quite shocked to hear that she was transported to the airport in the USA in chains, despite doing absolutely nothing wrong and posing no risk. The family want me to convey my thanks to all those at the Foreign Office and at the Consulate who helped bring this awful ordeal to a close. But Leader of the House, will you support me in securing a meeting between the Burke family and the Foreign Secretary so they can feed back their difficult experience with US immigration and customs enforcement to the Foreign Office so lessons can be learnt?
Leader.
Well, I am pleased to hear that her constituent, Rebecca Burke, has now safely returned home, and I'm very sorry to hear of the experience that she suffered in the US, but I'm glad that the Foreign Office was able to help in that time. The Foreign Secretary was in his place for the early part of her question, but if he didn't hear all of it, I will absolutely ensure that she gets a meeting with the appropriate minister.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I join with others in sending my deepest sympathy to the Shadow Leader on his loss. Madam Deputy Speaker, I recently attended the awards for the Grimsby and Cleethorpes Scout Group, and the member for Grimsby and Cleethorpes and I were glad to give up our Sunday afternoon to attend the event. And when you go to these events, you realise not how valuable it is for the young people concerned, but how important it is for that people give up, the adults and the Scout leaders give up their time to help develop the young people. Now, I know if I ask the leader for a debate in government time, she'll suggest I go to the Backbench Business Committee, but as a member of that committee, I'm aware how heavy the demands are. So I join the chairman in saying, could the leader give the Backbench Committee more time so that I won't have to wait too long for my Scout debate?
Well, can I join him in thanking the work of the Scouts that they do, but also all the adults that support the work of the Scouts, because it's absolutely vital for our young people, and thank him for making time on his weekend to go and support their work as well. And as ever, I hear the strong representations of the Backbench Business Committee. I think the Chairman and I are due to meet again soon to discuss other, perhaps more creative ways that we can find further slots as well.
We are expecting an important statement at midday, so if members keep their questions short and the leader also provides snappy answers, we might get everybody in. Tom Rutland.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Like 1% of the population, I suffer from celiac disease, an autoimmune disease that sees the gut attack itself if you eat gluten. There's no treatment other than a gluten-free diet, and the cheapest loaf of gluten-free bread can cost 6 times the amount of one that contains gluten. And despite this, prescriptions for gluten-free bread are being restricted across England by integrated care boards, leading to celiacs facing economic hardship and putting themselves at risk of cancer and osteoporosis. This must be reversed. Will the Leader of the House grant a debate in government time on the availability of gluten-free prescriptions across England?
Leader.
Well, he's made a very strong case today. I didn't realise gluten-free products were as expensive as he says they are, and he's right to point out that they are necessary for those celiac sufferers like him, and I'm sure this would make a very good topic for debate.
Tessa Munt.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I recognise your request for brevity, but nonetheless I'd like to offer my condolences and actually to say how much I identify with the maxim, which was turn up at the finishing line, having stood 8 times to get here, but been successful twice. Given that countless families in my part of Somerset have adopted and are special guardians to children and young people, many of whom live with significant challenges and trauma stemming from their treatment in early life, the Adoption and Special Guardianship Support Fund is a lifeline for the provision of essential therapeutic support. Whilst I've written to the Minister, and I understand that applications for therapy that started in this financial year can carry on into the next financial year, there's no news yet on the future of the fund beyond that, leaving many families in limbo. Can we have a debate to enlighten us as to when the government will make an announcement on this fund and how it proposes to support adoptive families to ensure they can access therapeutic support when it is needed?
Well, adoption support is really important, and this fund and the uncertainty about this fund is something that's been raised with me as a constituency MP as well, so I'm very well aware of it. So I will ensure that when I get a response about it, I pass that on to her as well.
David Williams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I start by extending my deepest condolences. The Shadow Leader's father was clearly a remarkable man. Stoke-on-Trent has a rich history reflected through the architecture found across our 6 proud towns. As part of English Tourism Week, I was delighted to welcome colleagues from the National Lottery Heritage Fund to our mother town of Burslem, where we discussed how we could unleash the potential of our beautiful buildings if given the right support. We must safeguard our heritage buildings, so will the Leader of the House make time for a debate on the regeneration of our towns and how the government can support them?
Leader.
Well, I'm really pleased to hear of the work that's happening in Stoke-on-Trent around restoration of heritage buildings and the work he's doing with the National Lottery Heritage Fund, because it's absolutely vital that industrial heritage is also considered heritage in this regard, and I'll absolutely support him in raising these matters on the House.
Ashley Fox.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The M5 motorway in Somerset is being closed ever more frequently and for longer durations. This causes great inconveniences to businesses and residents, occasionally gridlocking the town of Bridgewater. So can we have a debate in government time on the policy of national highways in when and for how long it closes our motorways?
Leader.
Well, I know absolutely how frustrating these kind of road closures can be on constituents and others travelling as well, and poorly planned roadworks and highway agency plans can be very devastating. So I will support him in getting these issues raised with ministers and hopefully in the House as well.
Olivia Bailey.
Madam Deputy Speaker. I recently visited the fantastic Tilehurst Junior Youth Club in my constituency and even enjoyed a stint running the tuck shop. It's so important that young people across our country have access to a safe place to play and socialise outside of school. So will the Leader of the House arrange for a debate on this government's plans for Young Futures hubs and improvements for services for young people?
Leader.
Well, she's absolutely right. We are committed to the Young Futures programme, which is progressing well, as she will know. I will ensure that the House is kept up to date on it as things progress, and that gives her a chance to once again praise the fantastic work of the Youth Club in her constituency.
Rupert Lowe.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Sincere condolences to the Shadow Leader of the House on the loss of his father. Mass deportations of illegal migrants and foreign criminals must be our ultimate policy objective. Is it going to be logistically straightforward? Absolutely not. Is it necessary? Absolutely yes. It's mass deportations or a mass amnesty. I choose deportations. Will the Leader of the House commit to a debate in government time on how we can deport the numbers required on a rapid timescale that is acceptable to the British people who reasonably expect our borders to be policed and the law upheld?
Well, I would gently say to the honourable gentleman that these matters are not as simple as he might suggest. This government is absolutely committed to protecting our borders. In fact, we have returned more people, illegal migrants, than has happened in recent years, and those numbers are going up and up. We've introduced the Border Security Command, which is already taking action at source, and we need to work internationally to make sure that people don't want to come here in the first place illegally. But we've got to take a range of actions, and presenting some kind of false, easy solution, I don't think does the issue any good at all.
Jane Kirkham.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Access to justice is a real issue in places like Cornwall, which is in effect a legal aid desert. When I first came to Cornwall in my previous life, I ran an employment law clinic at Citizens Advice in Falmouth. Citizens Advice do great work, but they struggle with funding and have recently had to drop their drop-in surgeries. Cornwall needs a law centre. Many urban areas have them, and I have willing volunteers. Could the Deputy Leader could the Leader please ask the appropriate Justice Minister to meet with me to discuss the routes to this and finding the funding?
Leader.
Well, absolutely, I will arrange a meeting for her, because she's absolutely right that access to justice and having the availability of these law centres, which I'm lucky enough to have in my own constituency, is vital to make sure that people have the justice they deserve.
Robbie Moore.
Madam Deputy Speaker, following Santander's disappointing decision to turn its back on Ilkley and close its bank branch, Link have now recommended that we have a full banking hub for our town, something which I've campaigned long for, and this, of course, is welcome news. But it should never have taken for the last bank to close before we can have one. Meanwhile, in Keighley, we've had bank branch after bank branch close, but there is no sight of us getting a banking hub. So will the Leader of the House grant time for a government debate on getting banking branch hubs to be able to open and not wait for the last bank branch to close, and make sure that those services can be accessible and that can have full cash access available within them?
Leader.
Well, he will know that in recent years, long before we were in government, we've seen a huge acceleration in the closure of banks on our high streets because of changing practices, but also because of decisions of the banks. But this government is committed to bringing in 350 banking hubs. We've got 200 now already allocated and over 100 already open. And I will absolutely ensure that he gets an update on the banking hub for his constituency.
Laura Kirksmith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Potholes have plagued motorists for too long in Buckinghamshire, damaging cars and making drivers, pedestrians and cyclists less safe. I welcome the government's commitment to deliver more than 20 million in funding to Bucks Council to fix those potholes, and I'm working hard to get our councillors elected on the 1st of May to ensure that that investment delivers results. Can my right honourable friend reaffirm this government's commitment to our road infrastructure and ensure this keeps getting priority in Parliament?
Filling our potholes is a really important action that this government is taking, and that's why we've set aside an extra £7 million we want to fill another 7 million potholes over the course of this Parliament, and I'm really pleased to see that she's working with her council and councillors she's hoping to get elected later this year to get the potholes fixed in her constituency.
Steph Aquarone.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I really valued the comments of the Shadow Leader of the House and of my colleague, and I'd like to offer, as well as my condolences, my time on a separate occasion to discuss with him his ideas about the future that he set out. Meanwhile, BT, Madam Deputy Speaker, have threatened to close down the K6 telephone box in Sharrington in my constituency. It's a vital lifeline for an area with poor mobile signal. Just a few weeks ago, an ambulance driver used this phone box to make an emergency call, and last Friday we rallied 50 locals to queue outside the phone box to make calls and prove its importance to BT. Will the Leader of the House arrange a debate in government time about the importance of phone boxes on rural communities and about the protection of vital rural services as a whole?
Well, look, I know that the provision of phone boxes still remains a really important one for many of our villages and towns across the country, and like in his constituency, he's taken his opportunity this morning to raise the phone box in his constituency, and I will ensure he gets a good reply about that.
Colin Naismith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Many of my constituents, particularly in the parish of Williston and the town of Nantwich, have been in touch about significant delays in receiving mail from Royal Mail, often going weeks without receiving a single piece of mail before receiving a whole stack of letters weeks later. And I'm sure my right honourable friend can appreciate this is resulting in my constituents missing important correspondence, including hospital appointments. So can my right honourable friend confirm when we might have a debate on Royal Mail performance?
Here.
Well, I can absolutely identify with what he describes, because I've had many similar issues in my own constituency, and I know that there are some systemic problems in Royal Mail around staff morale and some of the systems that they use, which means that people just aren't getting the service that they can rely on. I would advise that he raises these directly with Royal Mail, and perhaps like I did on behalf of my constituents, I raise them with the chair of the Business and Trade Select Committee, who hold regular accountability hearings with them.
Jim Shannon.
Deputy Speaker, can I, on behalf of my party, offer my condolences to the Shadow Leader of the House as well on the loss of his dad. My dad died 10 years ago, and there's not a day I don't think of it. I'm sure the honourable member will be the same. The Chinese Communist Party's long-term strategy for Tibet through to 2049 involves tightened rules for religion to deliberately suppress Tibetan Buddhism and religious identity by bringing religion under total control of the state to ensure that religious views and feelings are supplanted by loyalty to Chinese cultural nationalism.
That's right.
Will the Leader of the House ask the Secretary of State for the Foreign and Commonwealth Department Office to commit to raising with their counterparts in China the urgent need for additional protections to safeguard human rights to freedom of religion or belief, and that these concerns will remain central to its diplomatic engagements with China? Thank you so much.
Very good question.
Well, they absolutely do remain central to our diplomatic relations, and the Foreign Secretary and the Minister are here in their seat now and will have heard his question, and we do stand firm on human rights, and we make that very clear in our discussions with China and with anybody else.
So we do have a very important statement coming in just 1 minute. Final question, Chris Webb.
The Blackpool Pleasure Beach in my constituency was named the best seaside park at the UK Theme Park Awards. It's world-class attractions like the Pleasure Beach that bring the estimated 23 million people to Blackpool last year. Will the Leader of the House join me in praising the Pleasure Beach and all attractions in Blackpool and encourage everyone to have a staycation this year in the UK?
Well, absolutely can encourage everyone to go to Blackpool, have fish and chips on the promenade, perhaps go on the big one, which I'm too scared to go on, and I look forward to joining the honourable gentleman there soon.
Can I thank the Leader of the House for her responses this morning, which brings us to the statement on the conflict in Gaza. Foreign Secretary.
Well, with permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will make a statement about the conflict in Gaza. In January, I outlined to the House the deal agreed between Israel and Hamas. It was a moment of huge hope and relief. in the weeks that followed. Hostages cruelly detained by Hamas were reunited with their families, and aid blocked by Israel finally flooded into Gaza. A path out of this horrendous conflict appeared open. It's therefore as a matter of deep regret to have to update the House today on a breakdown of the ceasefire and yet more bloodshed in Gaza. On the night of the 18th of March, Israel launched airstrikes across Gaza. A number of Hamas figures were reportedly killed, but it's been reported that over 400 Palestinians were killed in missile strikes and artillery barrages. The majority of them were women and children. This appears to have been the deadliest single day for Palestinians since the war began. This is an appalling loss of life, and we mourn the loss of every civilian. Yesterday morning, a UN compound in Gaza was hit. I can confirm to the House that a British national was amongst the wounded. Our priority is supporting them and their family at this time. Gaza has been the most dangerous place in the world to be an aid worker. And I share the outrage of the UN Secretary General Guterres at this incident. The government calls for a transparent investigation and for those responsible to be held to account. The UK is now working closely with partners such as France and Germany to send a clear message. We strongly oppose Israel's resumption of hostilities. We urgently want to see a return to a ceasefire. More bloodshed is in no one's interests. Hamas must release all the hostages and negotiations must resume. Madam Deputy Speaker, diplomacy is the only way to achieve security for both Israelis and Palestinians. The House will know that the ceasefire in Gaza had lasted for almost 2 months, the result of dogged efforts by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States. The deal reached in January saw the nightmare of captivity for 30 hostages and the bodies of 8 further victims of Hamas returned to their loved ones. And we all remember the joy of seeing Emily Damari reunited with her mother and family and the desperately needed aid that had begun to flow back into Gaza. Food, medicines, fuel, tents. Children in Gaza had respite from relentless fear. The severely injured could cross the border again for treatment. Palestinians had begun to return to their homes and consider how to rebuild their lives. In the first days of the ceasefire, the UK moved swiftly to invest in the peace. We released £17 million in additional emergency humanitarian funding for the promised surge in aid. We were bringing our total support this year for Palestinians across the region to £129 million. We accelerated work on the pathway to reconstruction, supporting our Arab partners' very welcome recent initiative. And we worked at every level to support negotiations for a permanent ceasefire and the return of every single hostage, and a backed extension to phase 1 of the current deal. But negotiations have been gridlocked for several weeks. Hamas has been resisting calls for release of further hostages in return for a longer truce. Israeli forces did not begin to withdraw from the Philadelphia corridor as agreed. And on the 2nd of March, the Israeli government announced it was blocking all further aid deliveries until Hamas agreed to its terms. For weeks now, supplies of basic goods and electricity have been blocked, leaving over 500,000 civilians once again cut off from clean drinking water and sparking a 200% surge in the price of some basic foodstuffs, a boon to those criminals who use violence to control supplies. As I told the House on Monday, this is appalling and unacceptable. Ultimately, of course, these are matters for the courts, not governments, to determine. but it's difficult to see how denying humanitarian assistance to a civilian population can be compatible with international humanitarian law. Though it's important to say I could have been a little clearer in the House on Monday, our position remains that Israel's actions in Gaza are a clear risk of breaching international humanitarian law. The consequences of the ceasefire's breakdown, Madam Deputy Speaker, are catastrophic. For the family and friends of the remaining 59 hostages, including Avinatan Or, the agony goes on. Hamas's kidnapping of these people, their treatment of them in captivity, the cruel theatre of their release, depriving them of food and basic rights, these are acts of despicable cruelty. Hamas must release them all now. And Palestinian civilians who have already endured so much now must fear a rerun and a return to days of death, deprivation and destruction. Civilians have once again been issued with evacuation orders by Israel. Only 4% of the United Nations flash appeal is funded, not even enough to get through to the end of this month. Health centres have had to close, even as the devastated Gazan health service has to treat another surge of those wounded in strikes. Madam Deputy Speaker, Hamas can have no role in Gaza's future, but a collapsed ceasefire will not bring the hostages home to their families. An endless conflict will not bring long-term security to Israel, and a deepening war will only set back the cause of regional normalisation and risk further instability. Shortly after the Houthis resume their unacceptable threats to shipping in the Red Sea. Madam Deputy Speaker, since the renewed outbreak of hostilities, I have spoken to Secretary Rubio, to EU High Representative Callas, to the UN Emergency Coordinator Tom Fletcher, and I will shortly speak to my Israeli counterpart Gideon Saar and the Palestinian Prime Minister Mustafa. We and our partners need to persuade the parties that this conflict cannot be resolved by military means. We want Israel and Hamas to re-engage with negotiations. We continue to condemn Hamas, of course, for their actions on October the 7th, for their refusal to release the hostages and their ongoing threat to Israel, but we are also resolute in calling on Israel to abide by international law and to lift the unacceptable restrictions on aid and demand the protection of civilians. Many months ago, only weeks into office, I concluded that there was a clear risk of Israel breaching international humanitarian law in Gaza. It was this risk that I first set out in the House back in September, which meant that the government suspended relevant export licenses for items for use by the IDF in military operations in Gaza. The actions of last week only reinforce that conclusion. Madam Deputy Speaker, in the days and weeks ahead, we will redouble our efforts to restore a ceasefire, but we will also continue to work with our partners on the security, governance and reconstruction arrangements. Those issues are not going away. There remains no military solution to this conflict. A two-state solution remains the only path to a just and lasting peace. At this dispatch box in January, I called the ceasefire deal a glimmer of light in the darkness. It feels like the darkness has returned. Former British hostage Emily Damari said the resumption of fighting left her heartbroken, crushed and disappointed. I'm sure she speaks for the whole House, but we must preserve hope for the sake of the remaining hostages and their loved ones, for the people of Gaza, for the future of two peoples that have suffered so much for so long. We will keep striving for a return to the path to peace. I commend this statement to the House.
I call the Shadow Foreign Secretary Priti Patel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for the advanced sight of his statement. We all mourn the loss of innocent lives in this appalling conflict. The death of the UN aid worker and the injury to a British national is tragic, and our sympathies and thoughts are with their families. Can the Foreign Secretary provide an update on the direct engagement he has had with key interlocutors in the region to ascertain the facts around what happened, and has he been updated by the government of Israel on their investigation? The onward transition at the end of phase 1 of the ceasefire agreement was always going to be challenging. This is a difficult and a really fragile moment for the Middle East. But several basic truths remain unchanged, including the urgency to return to their loved ones, the 59 hostages captured by Hamas terrorists during the atrocities of October the 7th. This is vital for achieving a sustainable end to this horrendous conflict. The incredibly brave families of those held hostage remain firmly in our thoughts, and we should be very clear, the onus is squarely on Hamas. Hamas could agree to release these hostages now and avert any escalation. This is the moment for the UK government to show leadership with the international community to exert maximum pressure on Hamas to release these hostages. Madam Deputy Speaker, we should all fully understand who we are dealing with here. A brutal Iranian-backed terrorist organisation that seeks the destruction of the world's only Jewish state, which uses its own defenceless people as human shields, and which has ruthlessly eradicated fundamental freedoms in Gaza. Anyone who has read the shocking report from Lord Roberts and commissioned by the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Israel on October the 7th would have seen the harrowing details of the real-life consequences of Hamas, complete with a total disdain of their human dignity and the utter disregard for human life, visceral anti-Semitism and murderous intentions. The organised brutality, murder, rape and torture indiscriminately targeting babies, children, women and the elderly. As the Prime Minister himself once said, Hamas bears responsibility. Is that still the Prime Minister's and the government's position? Madam Deputy Speaker, it is abundantly clear that Iranian-backed Hamas can have no role in the future of Gaza, and we have raised this many times in this House. So what exactly is the British government doing at this moment in time to bear down on Hamas, work with partners to put an end to this brutal regime? What assessment has he made of the capabilities of Hamas and the ongoing threat the terrorists pose to peace and stability in the region? Does the government support the US proposal for securing the release of hostages? What is his vision of the next steps? Does he believe the phase 2 of the ceasefire remains within reach, or is he considering alternative solutions? There is too much at stake for Britain to be a bystander. We must be a proactive player with involvement. The Foreign Secretary mentioned his talks with France and Germany, but what discussions is he having with Egypt and other regional partners? We need Israel to continue seeing the UK as a trusted partner. The strength of Britain's relationship with Israel also matters for our wider influence in the Middle East. If we undermine our relationship and influence with Israel, we also lose influence across the Middle East. Careless comments do not help, including the Foreign Secretary's remarks to this House on Monday, for which has been rebuked by the Prime Minister, so will he apologise to the House and to Israel? The Foreign Secretary's focus should be on securing the release of the 59 remaining hostages, and this House should be united in that. Those hostages are held by Hamas since the atrocities of October the 7th, which is important and sustainable to end this conflict. Let's be clear, Hamas has no respect for international law, human life or human rights. So does the Foreign Secretary agree that we must be unequivocal that there is no moral equivalence between Hamas and the democratically elected government of Israel, and we must have no more poorly judged decisions on arms exports designed to placate his backbenchers? On the question of aid to Gaza, which perhaps the backbenchers would like to take seriously, I have said from this dispatch before that we expect detail about the government's practical response on the ground. How is the government working to unblock the situation? And what is happening to British aid that is already in the region or en route? What discussions has he had with Israeli counterparts in recent days? What is his assessment of the reports of Hamas stockpiling aid and the impact this has on distribution to civilians in need? Has he held discussions recently with the Red Cross on their very important work on hostage release and aid delivery? Can we be doing more to support the ICRC's work here? And on the region more broadly, as the Parliamentary Commission report makes crystal clear, we cannot ignore the role of the regime in Tehran, which has its fingerprints over so much of this inhumane suffering and bloodshed that we see today. We need action to deter Iran's malign agenda. So what options are on the table to tackle Iran and the flow of weapons and support to their terrorist proxies? What hard power options is he considering in respect to the Houthis? I did not receive answers on Monday in this House on that. I asked the Foreign Secretary on Monday as well whether Britain is in lockstep with the United States, but he did not answer that. So now is the time for him to provide clarity and clear answers.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady, and let me just make clear on the charity worker who was injured that, of course, our ambassador and the Foreign Office are in touch with his family, and as she would expect, we have made representations to the Israeli government, and I will be speaking to the Israeli Foreign Minister in the coming hours. She talks about Hamas, and I have said at this dispatch box that the scenes of those young men in balaclavas with Kalashnikovs parading hostages are obscene, and I condemn them. I said in January that we would continue to stand with the hostage families, and we will. There are still dozens of families waiting, hoping, praying that their loved ones can return. But I tell her too that she will have seen overnight that there are many of those families saying this is not the way to bring them home. They fear that as a consequence of this resumed action, their loved ones will perish. And so I thought the tone of some of her remarks did not sit with what I see coming out of Israel at this side. No one could not be absolutely touched and affected by the gaunt and malnourished hostages paraded around in a sick propaganda exercise. We all condemn Hamas. But I tell her too, when she asks what we are doing, and actually what the last government did, is we are supporting the Palestinian Authority with reform, because there has to be an alternative to Hamas, and the alternative to Hamas is the Palestinian Authority. And we've got to work with them. You've got to give people hope and prospect that isn't about terrorism. And that is about supporting Prime Minister Mustafa in all of his efforts, particularly, and that is what we've been doing, and that is why we've been working with the Arab Quint particularly. There was to be, she asked me about how we're working with partners in the area, there was to be a conference, a gathering in Egypt this weekend. It has been postponed, but it will be very important that we attend that gathering and work with our Arab partners. And I put on record our support of Egypt and Qatar in their conversations with Hamas. She knows that we don't talk to Hamas, but we do work with those partners who can. She asked me about future operations in the Red Sea, and she knows very well that I would never comment from this dispatch box about operational issues in the Red Sea. She asked me if there's any moral equivalence between Hamas and the Israeli government. Of course there's no moral equivalence between Hamas and the Israeli government. None of us have ever suggested that is the case. And she asked me quite rightly about the role of Iran, and she's right about the malign effect of Iran in the region, and we will act to ensure that they do not get the nuclear capability that they are seeking to secure. And this was an issue that I discussed with Secretary of State Rubio and my counterparts in France and in Germany.
Select Committee Chair Emily Thornbury.
Can I begin by thanking the Foreign Secretary for his passionate and articulate plea for peace from the dispatch box. In doing so, I know that he speaks for all of us, and I know that he has witnessed the suffering and feels it very deeply, as we all do. The renewed bombing in Gaza cannot be justified. The renewed siege of Gaza cannot be justified, and it is difficult to see how that is compatible. Either of those are compatible with international law. It will be for a court to decide, and there will be a reckoning. The question is, though, is what's going to happen now? Because whatever it is that the British government is doing in the region, it is clearly not working. So the question is, what is Plan B? What is Plan B? Now that the Israeli government has abandoned the fragile course of peace, what is Plan B for the West Bank, which still faces the threat of annexation, and following reports of these strikes, that those strikes may have American endorsement? What is Plan B when it comes to uniting our international allies to make sense of this senseless violation of the peace process? That we need to make sure that it is met not just with words, no matter how passionate and no matter how articulate. We have to do something, and we need to do something internationally and with our allies. Now is the time to stop talking about it and do something.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Lady, and I know that she was in the region very recently and discussing these very same issues at the Knesset. And let me say to her that the US envoy, Steve Witkoff, I understand, is flying into the area as we speak. And I hold out hope that we can still get to a ceasefire once more that gets us to the plan, which was to the end of the Passover period, and I can't give up hope on that. She says we've got to have more than words. She knows, as I do, that the business of diplomacy is words, is conversations, is using our influence to bring this about. And that's why we're working very closely with the United States, with our Arab partners, and of course with E3 partners particularly, and the European Union at this time. And I will do everything I can to get us back to that ceasefire.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Helen Maguire.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and to the Minister for the advance sight of this statement. Israel resuming its military campaign in Gaza is heartbreaking for all Palestinians, for the remaining hostages and their families, and for the world. For 2 months, the fragile ceasefire provided space for the release of hostages, and until early March, the flooding of Gaza with vital aid to alleviate the suffering of Palestinians. The resumption of fighting now threatens the lives of both the Israeli hostages, still held in captivity by Hamas, and Palestinians who've already seen their homes and communities devastated by 15 months of war. A new ceasefire must be secured as soon as possible. To this end, what discussions has the Foreign Secretary had with the Israeli government on rapidly recommitting to a ceasefire? Even before the resumption of military operations, the Israeli government had cut aid routes into Gaza, as well as the supply of electricity. This was illegal and wrong, contravening Israel's obligations under international law. In this House on Monday and today, the Foreign Secretary stated that Israel's aid blockade was a breach of international law. Will the Foreign Secretary outline what action he is taking to ensure there are consequences to breaching international law? Hamas must also now immediately and unconditionally release the remaining hostages, the treatment of whom while in captivity has been despicable. We're also deeply concerned by reports that a British bomb disposal expert has been injured and an explosion at a UN facility in the Strip, and our thoughts are with their family. Can the Foreign Secretary also update the House on his safety and condition? Arab states have a vital role to play in supporting the transition back to a state of ceasefire. Their plan to the reconstruction of Gaza also provides a pragmatic proposal for rebuilding the Strip, particularly when compared to the reckless proposals put forward by Trump, who described his intention to remove Palestinians from Gaza. Can the Foreign Secretary confirm that he has engaged closely with Arab partners in the region around their plans for reconstruction? As conflict returns to Gaza, we also need to give Palestinians hope and show them that we support their right to statehood. Does the Foreign Secretary agree with me that the UK must now move to officially recognise a state of Palestine as a vital part of a two-state solution which offers dignity and security to Palestinians and Israelis?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady. Since the renewed outbreak of hostilities, can I assure her that I've spoken to Secretary Rubio, I've spoken to EU High Representative Kai Kallas, and we're closely coordinated. I met with the Emergency Relief Coordinator, Tom Fletcher, in New York just last Friday, and we were discussing the issues in Gaza. And of course, I expect to speak to my counterpart, Gideon Saar, and Palestinian Prime Minister Mustafa very shortly. We're working very closely with our E3 partners particularly, and she will also have seen that there was a closed meeting of the United Nations Security Council on Tuesdays in which we made strong representations. She'll also be aware that these issues were discussed, and she'll have seen the communiqué that flowed from the G7 Foreign Ministers meeting last week in Canada. As I have now said on 10 occasions since September, Israel's actions in Gaza are a clear risk, or at a clear risk, of breaching international humanitarian law. The government's been clear all along that we're not an international court, and we could not make a judgment as to whether Israel has breached international humanitarian law. But I made a decision back in September based on whether there was a clear risk, and for that reason we have suspended those sales to Gaza, and they'll continue to be suspended. And let me tell her also that in relation to the British hostages, we are in relation to the British charity worker who has been wounded, we are of course in contact with his family, and I intend to keep the House updated.
Melanie Ward.
Deputy Speaker, and I want to say thank you to the Foreign Secretary for all the work that he and his team are doing behind the scenes on this horrific issue. And I have to say it's quite shocking that the Shadow Foreign Secretary appears unable to say the word Palestinian. And as someone who used to be an international aid worker and was in Gaza, I want to say that the lives of Palestinian aid workers are every bit as valuable as the lives of international aid workers. And more than 170 Palestinian children have been killed this week alone. And yesterday, the Israeli Defence Minister threatened the ethnic cleansing of Gaza.
Question, then I will assist. Please carry on with the question.
Yesterday, the Israeli Defence Minister threatened the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. What action is the Foreign Secretary taking to stop this and to hold the government of Israel accountable for its actions?
Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady that humanitarian aid should never be used as a political tool, and Israel must restart the aid immediately. This is a time when a lot of diplomatic activity is going on. As I said, Steve Witkoff, the envoy, has flown into the area, and we are in touch with the US. I am closely working with E3 and the EU. In fact, I will be speaking very shortly to my French counterpart. We have not given up hope. I sense that there has been a loss of hope in this chamber that we can get back to a ceasefire, but I'm telling you now, this Foreign Secretary has not given up hope that we can get back to a ceasefire. It's my job to try and do the best to deliver that, and that is what I intend to do over the coming hours.
Is the point of order absolutely relevant right now? Priti Patel.
I seek your advice, Madam Deputy Speaker, on just the clarification on the misrepresentation that I have not spoken about the Palestinian Authority in this House at the dispatch box when I have on a number of occasions, Madam Deputy Speaker.
We need to make sure can we please be seated? This is a very sensitive and important debate. We need to make sure that language is tempered and respectful at all times. Our constituents and indeed the world is watching, and we need to make sure that we are not in any way inadvertently misrepresenting each other and our colleagues. But it is noted, but we will now continue. We have a lot of people to get through. Father of the House said.
I agree with everything the Foreign Secretary has said, and particularly we have to give hope to the Palestinian people. To be fair to the Israeli government position, Hamas could solve this now if they release the hostages. But having said that, it is surely wrong, would the Foreign Secretary agree that it is quite wrong for anybody in the Israeli government to say that the Gazan people could rise up against Hamas? If you do that, you'll best be tortured or probably killed. The people of Gaza are victims of Hamas as much as anybody. And it is quite wrong for the Israeli government to inflict collective judgment on the people of Gaza. This will bring death, destruction, more radicalism, and will never get the hostages home.
Well, the Father of the House speaks with tremendous authority, And that is why I've said, look, none of us stand with Hamas. All of us want to see Hamas removed. But you have to provide an alternative to Hamas. And it seems to me that alternative is the Palestinian Authority and working alongside people to undermine Hamas. We also have to see the end of Hamas, and there are ways. We did it in Northern Ireland with de-arming. There are ways to bring this about, but they are best done through diplomatic and political solutions, not military endeavour.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The double standards and injustice we are witnessing on the international stage is truly appalling. It's obvious that Israel is breaking international law, as every serious legal expert on international law has pointed out. And it's shameful, frankly, that the government refuses to state that about Israel, but will rightly do so about Russia's violation in Ukraine. And I say to the Foreign Secretary, the concern and outrage he expresses at the dispatch box is not ending the bloodshed. When will we get the scale of sanctions on Israel that its war crimes demand?
Well, can I say to the Honourable Gentleman, the conflict has gone on for 526 painful days. And I recognise the strength of feeling after more than 49,000 people have been killed in Gaza. It's a staggering amount of people. He would not expect me to, from this dispatch box, comment on any further sanctions. But of course we keep these issues under close review.
Kit Malthouse.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's been estimated that in the opening salvos of this appalling aggression, the Israelis killed 80 Palestinian children in the space of 51 minutes. There have been reports of children going through amputations without anaesthetics due to the blockade. And of course, it's been reported that leaflets were dropped across Gaza last night threatening extermination. Surely, even for the government, the Israelis have now crossed a monstrous red line. Now, the Foreign Secretary talks about equivalence. I'm assuming that he believes that the Palestinian civilians and their lives are equivalent to the lives of Israeli citizens and also are equivalent to the lives of Ukrainian citizens. This morning, ministers were out on the airwaves offering British troops to keep the peace between Ukraine and Russia. What is it about the Palestinian people that means they're less deserving of that kind of protection?
A whole generation of Gazans are growing up in the most unbearable conditions, and I know that the Honourable Gentleman has been a champion of those children who we saw rummaging around in the rubble, children who are now orphaned. So many, thousands of children in Gaza out of school. So it's absolutely right that he brings their plight to this House. But the way forward we were shown back at the beginning of January, which is a ceasefire, negotiations to getting to phase 2, getting to phase 3, and a horizon to a two-state solution. That is what I will continue to fight for.
Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think we all share the Foreign Secretary's shock and anger and frustration at the breakdown of the ceasefire and the deaths that we are seeing in Gaza. And as today's debate shows, words do matter. I want to follow up on the comments from my colleague from Cowdenbeath, given that we are now hearing reports that there are ground activities happening in Gaza led by the Israeli forces. Israel Katz, the Defence Minister, claimed that evacuation of Gaza would resume, and he is threatening the total devastation. These are not the actions of a government that wants peace. They are the actions of an increasingly authoritarian government, more interested in their own political survival than the survival of any innocent civilian, be they Palestinian or Israeli. This is not what the hostage families want to see, and we should speak for them as much for the innocent civilians in Gaza, the Palestinians whose lives are being lost. Can the Foreign Secretary be clear, for avoidance of doubt, that we do not agree with, we condemn the words of Israel Katz, not as they are not going to bring forward the ceasefire, they're not going to uphold international law if they are left unchallenged?
I do condemn those words, and I would ask Minister Katz, who's very experienced, to withdraw them.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The language that we use in this conflict matters. We know what has happened, and the Foreign Secretary has reminded us today. For weeks, supplies of basic goods and electricity have been blocked. So to say that Israel, having done that, risks breaching international law is to say that the position of this country, and this is how it will be heard in Tel Aviv, does not see these acts as a prima facie breach of international law. Is that really the government's position?
The government's position is based on the law that was set out in our export licensing regime, which the Honourable Gentleman supported in the last Parliament. And the language of that legislation, if he looks at it closely, is that I, as Minister, on behalf of the government, have to make an assessment of clear risk. That is the language that I've used 10 times in this House since September. I stand by it, and so should the Honourable Gentleman.
Speaker, and I want to thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement and his absolute commitment to the end of the fighting in Gaza, to the return of the hostages, and to ultimately a two-state solution. But I do want to say to him that I am contacted by constituents of all backgrounds, of all faiths and none. They stop me in the street and they see the mutilated bodies of babies. They see the consequences of the blockade on humanitarian aid. And they say to me, what is this government doing about it? What am I doing about it? So will he say to my constituents now what action the British government will take in response to Israel's actions in Gaza and the West Bank?
And let me make clear, when she talks about the horrors in Gaza, she should reassure her constituents that the United Kingdom announced £129 million of funding for the occupied territories just in the last year, and that included 41 million for UNRWA, that we're very clear that humanitarian aid should not be used as a tool, and that, of course, UK support has meant over 500,000 people have received essential health care. 647,000 of them have received food, and 284,000 people have improved access to water, sanitation, and hygiene as a result of the British taxpayer. In terms of what we're doing, I've been in this House 25 years. The Honourable Lady knows that this is about diplomacy. It's about diplomacy. I wish that I could switch this off from this dispatch box. She knows full well I can't do that, but what I can do is engage in the issues in detail. It's hard grind. I know this is hard for many in this House, but that is how you bring about a ceasefire.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And my right honourable friend, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, mentioned the all-party parliamentary group report on the atrocities committed on the 7th of October 2023, brilliantly researched by Lord Roberts and a whole series of different individuals. This is a document almost 500 pages long, and it contains the evidence of what happened, not only on that day, but also subsequently. I would commend it to the Foreign Secretary to read. In future, this will be the definitive history of what happened on the 7th of October. Could he, therefore, look at the fact that we have 59 hostages still in captivity? It's understood that only 24 are alive, and probably only barely alive if they are, and 35 dead. The reality is there is an opportunity for the deal as proposed by the United States, for a ceasefire to continue, for the release of the hostages and for Hamas to lay down their arms. That is still open to the terrorists in Hamas to take up. And if they do so, we can then all unite across the House and call for the end of death and destruction.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for mentioning those hostages. The question is now, how do we get those remaining hostages home? And is the action that we've seen in the last 2 to 3 days likely to bring them home, or is it likely to see more of them perish? And I want to stand with the many hostage families who say, can we give the talks a chance to succeed? Because I do think that military action is unlikely to bring them home.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've all been absolutely horrified to see the devastating impact of Israel's military airstrikes, and the Foreign Secretary rightly said it's an appalling and unacceptable loss of life, and that our Labour government opposes the resumption of hostilities. Does the Foreign Secretary agree with me that there is no military solution to this conflict?
Let me state again, there is no military solution to this conflict. It's a conflict that's gone on for 17 months. Had there been a military solution, it would have been found by now. The way forward is a political process and getting back to those ceasefire negotiations.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The inhumanity and the depravity that we witnessed on Tuesday defies belief. But what it does show is that after 17 months, Israel understands fully what impunity is. Because Netanyahu shattered that fragile ceasefire, killing 400 civilians sheltering in tents, mostly babies and toddlers, knowing that there would be absolutely no consequence for his action. So could the Foreign Secretary tell me, can he think of any other conflict at any other point in history when the UK would have accepted one of its closest allies and one of its closest military partners designating babies and toddlers as legitimate military targets?
Can I just say to the Honourable Gentleman that the whole House will have heard his language. I think the whole House also understands that this is one of the most complex of atrocities. There are atrocities on both sides of this conflict, and I just remind him of the scenes of those murdered horrendously on October the 7th. What we need now is more light and less heat.
Matthew Patrick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This ceasefire must be desperately salvaged. For the 59 hostages who they and their families have lived through hell for 530 days now, but also for the innocent people of Gaza who need aid and need safety and security and themselves have lived through hell through that time. Hamas, I worry, they state they want to repeat the actions of October 7th. They are committed only to endless war. What can this government do to ensure they have no role in the future of Gaza?
Well, let me say to the Honourable Gentleman that reports have come in that Hamas has now started firing rockets into Israel, and sirens are at this time sounding in Tel Aviv. I condemn Hamas's rocket attacks, and I want to reiterate that the only way through this is to get back to a ceasefire. It's unacceptable that Israeli civilians are running for cover, and Palestinian civilians are finding that the casualties are rising. There can be no place for Hamas in the future of Gaza, and that's why we're doing everything to help the reform of the Palestinian Authority, and we believe that they must play a role in Gaza's governance in the months and years ahead.
Desmond Swain.
Despite a huge investment in our relationship with Israel over so many years, we appear to be reduced to the position of spectators on a touchline, shouting at the players and being largely ignored. To what extent does the Secretary of State believe, if any, that our lack of leverage is a consequence of policy decisions taken in Washington?
Well, I think it's clear that the efforts of US Envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump did bring us to a place where we'd got a ceasefire. And I might say that it sometimes can feel futile. Diplomacy can feel very hard. The words of parliamentarians can feel like they had no effect. But everything that every single one of us as members of Parliament did in those 17 months also led to that ceasefire in January. We wish we could have brought it about sooner, and now we must act to get back to that ceasefire as quickly as possible.
Warren de Just.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it is obvious that by us saying that we strongly oppose hostilities and that we are appalled by Israel's action is having absolutely no effect on Netanyahu, who said at the death of 400 Palestinians, most of whom were women and children, that this was only the beginning. It is not right that the ordinary people of Palestine should suffer because of the actions of Hamas. Does the Foreign Secretary agree that we now need to send a stronger message to Israel and go further, perhaps by suspending all arms licenses to Israel and by recognising the State of Palestine?
Let me say to the Honourable Gentleman, we are 3 days into a resumption of fighting. 3 days too long, and I have lamented in my statement and numerous times already in the Chamber the loss of life. But 3 days means that there is more diplomacy that we can deploy to get that ceasefire back, and that is what I intend to do over the coming hours and days.
Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for a statement? It's never easy to come to the Chamber and make a statement on something that is incredibly complex. We all watched with horror as Israeli prisoners were released, not in a sombre, dignified release, but instead paraded about as an example of the control that Hamas had. As far as Hamas were concerned, they weren't human beings, but instead they were trophies of abuse and hate. Those scenes were etched into the minds of people throughout the world, and will the Secretary of State confirm the fact that now, as much as ever, Israel must show her strength and her friends, and to show Hamas to be the murderous scum that they are? And will the Secretary of State reaffirm his pledge to support those who stand against the evil personified by the Hamas terrorists?
Well, I'm very grateful for what the Honourable Gentleman has said, and let me once again condemn Hamas, condemn their activities and condemn them for not releasing those hostages from this dispatch box. That is the way out of this. Release the hostages. Let us get back to a political process, get back to ceasefire, and stop firing rockets into Israel.
Nestle Kazkan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I take the opportunity to thank the Foreign Secretary and his team for what I know are personal efforts, diplomatic efforts to play the UK government's part in making sure that we can return to a ceasefire. But in the last few days, hundreds of more women and children have been killed in Gaza. We've now had confirmation from the Foreign Secretary that a British national aid worker, UN aid worker, has been wounded, and aid continues to be blocked. The hope for Palestinians is moving far away. Can I ask the Foreign Secretary to further reiterate his commitment around the diplomatic efforts of this government, but also to give us a sense of what the UK government is doing at this moment, where there is such darkness for the Palestinian people, where they think about what may be coming in the coming days, so that we can very quickly not only return to a ceasefire, but a longer-term hope for that region.
Well, the Honourable Lady asks what we're doing. Alongside my G7 partners, and I would refer her to the communique, there was a lengthy section on the situation in Gaza discussing this with 7 other of our closest partners. I then flew to New York to meet with Tom Fletcher to discuss the situation on the ground. I met with our colleague in the European Union, Kaya Kallas just this week to discuss these very same issues. And I know that she intends to be in the region to discuss these issues face to face with Israeli counterparts. She will have seen the work of our UN ambassador, Barbara Woodward, in the UN. There was a closed session where, of course, they were discussing with intensity these very same issues. So I want to reassure her that all efforts are going in, and of course, we stand alongside the supporting the reform of the Palestinian Authority. It's why I'll be speaking to Prime Minister Mustafa a little later today.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a tragic fact that military conflicts, wherever they occur, result in the death of innocent civilians, and among them many children. And we witness this day in, day out on our TV screens. Israel has an absolute right to take action to recover the hostages, but I agree with the Foreign Secretary that the continuing bombardment of Gaza of itself will not achieve that. Indeed, would you agree with me that one thing it does achieve, it risks radicalising the younger generation to become the Hamas supporters of the future?
Well, that is the huge concern, because we want to provide hope for these people, and we want to provide an alternative to Hamas. And I just repeat, after 17 months of bombardment, if it was going to work, it would have worked. It hasn't worked. And to go back to that, as night follows day, at the end of any military exercise, Hamas will still be there, and you'll still come back to a political process. So let us continue with the political process and the ceasefire talks now. Let's extend phase 1 to the end of the Ramadan Passover season, and let us work hard to get to phase 2.
Shalami.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This ceasefire provided a glimmer of hope, as the Foreign Secretary mentioned, for the innocent civilians fleeing the constant bombardment, the bloodshed. It provided hope for the innocent hostages waiting desperately to be reunited with their families. And to see Israel breach this is indefensible. The targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure should not be justified under any circumstances. I thank the Foreign Secretary for the work that he's doing and the personal efforts he's leading behind the scenes, including the recent statement with the UK, Germany and French foreign ministers. And as the Foreign Secretary knows, leadership requires that honesty with your friends and telling things how they are. And will the Foreign Secretary commit to the UK showing leadership in providing that international clarity to end this cycle of violence, and clarity on this really serious area around international law breaches?
Well, I commend my honourable friend for bringing her moral clarity to the Chamber this afternoon. And yes, of course, I can confirm that we will continue to do all we can, and we stand by the judgments that we made back in September when we assessed that there was a clear risk of a breach of humanitarian law.
Ellie Chand.
Thank you, Madam President. Israel is committing war crimes in Gaza, blocking the entry of humanitarian aid, cutting electricity essential for drinking water, forced displacement of civilians, and now indiscriminate bombing, killing and maiming many children. These are not just clear risks of breach of humanitarian law, they are clear breaches. And it's just not enough to say we don't like it. So can I ask the Secretary of State a very specific question? Has he explicitly asked the Israeli government whether any UK-made arms or arms components were used in the mass airstrikes in recent days that broke the ceasefire and have caused untold suffering for civilians?
Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady that in making our assessment on a clear risk of a breach of humanitarian law, we suspended arms sales to Israel. That is what we did, and I stand by that decision.
Paul Wall.
Madam Deputy Speaker, of the 170 children killed in Israel's deadly day of bombing in Gaza on Tuesday, 3 of them were brothers. and they were sons of Karim Tariq Hamid. Hassan, who was 9, Mohammed, aged 8, and Aziz, who was just 5. They used to play around and have fun, their father told the BBC. They wanted to be doctors, teachers. I'm the father of 3 sons too, and it disgusts me that actually Israel's actions seem to somehow treat Palestinian children's lives as somehow more expendable, less precious than Israeli children's lives. So isn't it time we had a diplomatic coalition of the willing, maybe starting with the E3 of the UK, France and Germany, to say not just through actions but words, not just words but actions, actually how we're going to call out Israel's appalling crimes in Gaza?
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman that as the father of an adopted child, I feel personally the plight of the many, many children in Gaza that have been orphaned, the many children that are subject to exploitation as a result that they now have no parents. And it breaks my heart that amongst those who are now injured, who are now bereft, who have lost their parents, that more horrors could have been deployed on them. So I understand the strength of his feeling, and it's why I'm doing all I can with E3 partners particularly to try and halt this behaviour.
Julian Lewis.
Has the government received any indication or formed any view about what the current Israeli government would do if, admittedly against all expectation, Hamas were to release all the hostages forthwith?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's certainly a matter that I have discussed with the United States envoy, Steve Witkoff, and indeed I've discussed with the Israeli government. He will know there's a lot of politics in Israel. And it's my sincere hope that these judgments are not being guided by political calculation when they cut to the core of human life. And I say to those in Israel, listen to those hostage families. Listen to the way out of this. Let's get back to a ceasefire, because I'm quite sure at the end of any military exercise, the risk is less hostages will be alive. And anyway, you will have to get back to negotiation, because military endeavour will not see the end of Hamas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I think we have all been shocked and horrified to see the escalation in Gaza over the last few days. I thank the Foreign Secretary for his words today. And I just want to ask him what work he's doing both with the international community but also directly with the Israeli government to lift the blockade on aid to ensure that he can get to the Palestinian people, particularly given the escalations we've seen in recent days.
Well, the Honourable Lady's right. We've got to lift the blockade on aid, particularly, and that's why we've increased our funding at this time, and that we will be working closely with partners in the region to get that aid in. But let me also just take this opportunity. I remember meeting with the families of 3 British workers killed in the World Central Kitchen attack, John Chapman, James Kirby and James Henderson. It's nearly a year since that attack, and they want and deserve justice. And there are many other families, many Palestinians, more than 350, who've lost their loved ones, also killed in this conflict. We cannot see the continued killing of aid workers in any conflict, and we condemn it in this House.
Chris Law.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to begin with a quote. Annihilate, smash, eradicate, erase, crush, shatter, burn, be cruel, punish, ruin, crush, annihilate. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is the genocidal voice of the Israeli government, as posted on X only last night by Itamar Ben-Gvir as he is reappointed as Cabinet Minister. Foreign Secretary recognised this week that Israel is in breach of international law. So what further evidence does the Prime Minister need to recognise this and for the UK government to end its complicity end these crimes by stopping support from the Israeli government committing atrocities against the Palestinian peoples.
Well, if those are the words that were used last night, and I haven't seen them all, then I condemn them categorically from this dispatch box.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for his update. It is clearly appalling what we're seeing. The signals are absolutely clear coming from the Defence Minister Katz. They seek total destruction of Gaza, and they see the occupation of West Bank as being their objectives. The leverage over Netanyahu's government is from Ben Gvir and from Smotrich. So my question is really simple, and that is, other than reviewing all the arms slices once again, or maybe withdrawing them, and the sanctions against Israel, what leverage does the UK government have over Israel in this circumstance?
Well, I can't comment on future sanction designations, but I refer him to the sanctions that I announced back in October, with raising concerns particularly about settlements, the settle of violence particularly in the West Bank. And I condemn the expansion, more expansion this year than we've seen in any other year. And I want to reassure him that we keep sanctions closely under review.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Millions around the world saw last night in real time the destruction of life, loss of children's lives and more destruction, and the Israeli attempt to annex northern Gaza, if not the whole of Gaza, because that is clearly what the whole agenda is about. And Israel continues to commit war crimes by the denial of food, water and electricity to the people of Gaza. Will the British government actually confirm they're in breach of international law? And secondly, will we cease all military cooperation with Israel, arms supplies and the use of RAF Akrotiri as a staging point for the delivery of weapons?
Well, can I condemn any attempts to annex Gaza or attempts to annex the West Bank? And I know that this is an issue that the Honourable Gentleman, Right Honourable Gentleman, has raised in the past. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on operational military matters, but I've been absolutely clear that our assessment, and it's why on the legislation that he supported and that I supported, that was put through this House under the last government, that my assessment was that there was a clear risk that there is a breach of international humanitarian law. And I just remind the House, gently as a lawyer, that that assessment actually of a clear risk is a pretty, it's a low standard, but yet on the assessments that I made, that I saw, that I've seen, and I continue to see, that is my assessment. And so therefore, I think the Honourable Gentleman should be comforted that we are not assisting in what we are seeing in Gaza.